Monotheistic religions helped set us up for what we're seeing politically now in America. If you're new here, my name is Zakiya Young, the official suburban Black girl. And yes, so this hit me the other night because I was thinking about how many practicing Christians have been fooled by who seems to be the Antichrist who is now sitting as president of the United States. And I was laughing because thinking back to when I was in church all the time, very active member of an evangelical church that has a huge membership, I would think about the rapture and I would be one of those people that was like looking at non believers or people who didn't practice Christianity the same way we were encouraged to. I would be sad for them. I would be looking on them with pity. And you're encouraged to do that. The Bible is basically set up for you to feel as though you, Bible reader, have the answer and everybody else doesn't have the answer. And similar things are true of the other main monotheistic religions, Judaism as well as Islam. These three main monotheistic religions are set up so that you believe that you are the one who has the truth and everybody else is just not chosen or they're blind. The difference with Christianity is that there's an active recruitment of the lost. And I'm using quotes because I realize now that I'm not part of the church how patronizing that is. To call people lost because they don't look at religion the same way you do is so patronizing. So, my bad to anybody I referred to as lost before. And when you also think about these three big main religions, it's very patriarchal. And I can only speak on the Bible because that's the only text that I've read several times and know really well. It's set up so that men are in charge, period, point blank. Now, women can have some positions of leadership, but according to Paul, a woman is never to be in leadership over a man. So when you have someone like the felon in the White House who comes in like a bull in a china shop, and when you line that up with traditional notions of what manhood is and what it looks like, it's very attractive to religious men, very attractive. And to the women in the church, depending on what church you're in, you can look at it as if, well, the country could be similar to the household. And if the man is the head of the household, then a man should be head of the country, which is why so many of y'all just couldn't bring yourselves to vote for VP Harris or for Hillary Clinton. Let's just be real about that. A lot of your patriarchy is baked into your religion, and you can't see it because you're so deep in the religion. Another way that monotheistic religions set us up for what we're seeing now is that most of the leaders in your texts are quoted saying very direct things, very blunt things. They speak with authority. So you look to your male leaders to speak very similarly. Also, systems in the Bible are set up so that when you have an issue with someone, there's always a man involved in settling the issue. The leadership of all churches are men. And if you have a group of men that's not holding the main man accountable, then it can be a shit show. So if you grow up hearing that God is a man, seeing that Jesus was a man, seeing that all of his named disciples who get the most print are men, yes, we had Mary Magdalene, and I'm sure countless other women who have gone unnamed or the focus hasn't been on them. Because remember, the women discovered that Jesus was no longer in the tomb, but the men basically took over the story in the scriptures. So when you're used to having women's contributions being erased, when you're used to having the story always be about men, there's a couple side stories about women that make people feel comfortable, nothing too uncomfortable. When you grow up with stories of women being punished for activities and crimes that also involve men, but the men aren't punished at all. Like the woman caught in the act of adultery. Do we hear about the man that she was with? Like all of this talk about the woman at the well, that Jesus was like, yeah, girl, you've had many husbands. We don't ever look at the men's contribution to that. We just focus on, ooh, that bad woman, Rahab the harlot. Like, can you imagine that being the way that you are referred to in religious texts when you did something that was so important that it needed to be part of the Bible, but they had to add some shame onto it, right? They had to add some kind of judgment. Rahab the harlot. So when you grow up with these symbols and you sit under the teaching every week where you're taught that you are born evil, everybody is born in sin, and you need a savior, then you always look to some man to help you. You always look to a man to save the day. Why do you think romance novels are so popular? Why do you think Disney movies are so popular? You have a woman who can't wait to find her prince, to be rescued by her prince. I mean, thank God for Mulan, because we finally started to shift the narrative. But it's not very different from what you see in the Bible. And I can't speak for the other religious texts for the other major monotheistic religions, but I think you're going to find some patterns there. So now you have people that are in the fuck around and find out phase, and they are shocked because they really and truly felt like, as people that were following what God told them, supposedly, about the felon in the White House, they thought they were protected. There's this, gosh, what should I call it? It's like, not righteous indignation, but I guess I should call it righteous entitlement. There we go. There is a type of righteous entitlement you have as a Christian. And I'll say that speaking from my own experience, because again, you're being told by the text as well as your pastors that you are different, you are special, you are God's chosen people. So you move through the world sometimes with these blinders on that make you believe that because you're part of this religion, it's going to protect you from harm. And if harm comes your way, it's one of two things. Either you have some sort of hidden sin that God wants you to confess, or God is using you as a sacrifice to help others. God is going to use your story to help others. So any kind of harm you go through is for a bigger purpose. And it's interesting because when you start to live life, you start to realize like, oh, that's not necessarily true. And as a church kid, I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, heck, go back and watch some of my endometriosis videos. Like finding out I was infertile after saving myself from marriage to that man who did not appreciate it or deserve it at all had me all fucked up. I was like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that y'all were lying about what would happen if we waited for marriage? So as that happens with other things, I feel like you have a lot of Christians right now that voted for that man that are shocked that they would be laid off. They are shocked that prices haven't gone down. And I'm willing to bet money that in the same breath, they're also going to say, well, God's will be done. And if this is what it takes for Jesus to come back, then it's a sacrifice I have to make. Because if you're not aware, a lot of people think that the man in the White House is going to usher in the circumstances and the environment for Jesus to return. And I'm not kidding. I'm not being sarcastic. I used to work for a religious organization 8 years ago when I first moved to LA, and I remembered being introduced to another branch of Christianity, the prophetic branch. And there were things that I loved about it. I'm not going to lie. There were things that I definitely loved about it. And I still have some friends from that job to this day. But there were some things that made me very, very, very uncomfortable. Like, I remember being brought to this service that was happening in LA. And I remembered seeing an American flag and a flag for Israel. And I was like, this is interesting, because even in the big evangelical church I attended back in New York and the churches I grew up in Pennsylvania, like that just wasn't a thing. I was confused as to why the speaker opened up the service praying for Israel. And this was 8 years ago. It was very interesting. You know, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this, because it feels like we're bringing politics into the church service. And I thought that this branch of Christianity, not the black church has always been political, always. And to be honest, because of my suburban trauma, that was part of why I wanted to veer away from it, because I didn't want everything to be about fighting for policy, about being seen. I had, I was definitely in a space that was OJ adjacent. Not saying I'm not Black, I'm OJ, but I was in a space of, does everything have to be about me being Black? I'm tired. I just want to go to church and worship. And I'm saying that because I know there are other Black people out there that are in evangelical spaces too, that are probably questioning why they switched churches. There's also this thing that you're taught in these spaces. It's seductive because you're kind of encouraged to forget about the things that make you different, because we're all God's children, right? So if you are someone in a predominantly white area, it might be kind of a relief, like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I don't have to like think about the trauma that I face on a regular basis as a Black person. I can just come into church. But that's by design. That's by design. It's almost like they want to um, declaw you. That's not the right word. That's not the right phrase, but they want to numb you from the appeal of the outside world. Because if they can get you in the church, and if they can get your social circle to only be the church where we don't see race because there's no race in heaven, then you're not going to be pushing on the church to be the church. You're not going to be questioning, why do we keep having all these ministry trips to different countries that are only Black and brown? You won't question why we don't do ministry actually in our cities. Why are we taking money and spending it on people overseas when we literally have people sleeping outside of our church? Like, you won't question that, because now you've been trained to almost stop seeing yourself as Black. You see yourself as a Christian first. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm stepping on some toes here. I know. But if you know, you know that a very common thing to say in the church is, I'm a child of God first. I'm Black second and a woman third. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. So when you think about these things that you're learning in these churches that are largely pastored by white men, and again, I'm not talking about the Black church. I'm not talking about the Black church. But if you are members of these churches that are pastored by white men, or that were plants, church plants that were offshoots of large churches that are pastored by white men, you're probably very uncomfortable with what I'm speaking right now. But you know I'm right. It's almost like you fall for the notion that these are earthly problems that you don't need to worry about as a godly person. So I think, yes, there are many reasons why so many people didn't vote, but I think a big reason that a lot of us aren't thinking about is that I think there is a subset of Christians that would call themselves conservative, but didn't feel comfortable with Trump as the nominee. I think there's also I think there's a subset of Christians that are troubled by what's going on in the world, but because they're so heavenly focused, they don't think they should even pay attention to what's happening, because what they'll say is, God's going to work it out. His ways are not our ways. So they have this mindset of sitting back and letting God take control. And what I find fascinating is that I used to have that same mindset about a lot of things in my life. And it wasn't until I moved out here and started questioning things that I realized sometimes God gives you the answer and you have to take action. So sometimes it is going to be questioning your pastor about why they're not speaking up about certain ideas. It's not just enough to leave these churches. It's not. Because especially if you're a black or brown person that's suddenly leaving a church, they're not going to miss you because you're not in the majority. I think it is more effective if it's not hurting your mental health to ask these questions and disrupt the system a little bit before you leave. If you leave. I'll give you an example. I'm a member of a predominantly white organization, and as things have been unfolding, I messaged them. I was like, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to say? Because I'm not the only black member. I have a lot of concerns, but if you are not going to meet those needs of this now diverse membership, then I'm going to have to revoke my membership. And that opened the door to an incredible conversation with the leadership where we were able to share ideas and I could add my input for a plan that they did have in place that they are starting to roll out. So if I would have just been like, you know what, bump that, I'm leaving, I'm out, I would have missed the opportunity to give some insight that can help on a larger scale, right? I had two dear friends also email the organization to see what they were going to do. So, yes, sometimes the move is to boycott. But if you love Jesus, and I'm someone, I love Jesus. Jesus is the homie. I still pray to God. I still talk to Jesus. I don't do organized religion. But for those of you who still do and are troubled, what does the Bible say? If you have issues, talk to the leadership. There is a biblical way that you're supposed to address conflict and you're supposed to take different ideas to the leadership. You can absolutely plant a seed before you leave. You can absolutely rebuke them according to the words Jesus said. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the thing is, you can leave and save yourself. And I get that. But if you are but think about what an impact you could make if in your letter or email that you send, that you drop some scriptural knowledge that combats whatever policies or behaviors are upsetting you. You can absolutely do that. I recommend you do that instead of just leaving without saying anything. Because obviously they're going to frame you as someone who has backslidden and is under demonic attack. Like, we already know that's going to happen. But what they can't do is ignore that little thing that you say before you leave that holds them accountable according to the words in the holy text that they say is the word of God. So yeah, I'm definitely not surprised that we're seeing so many people regretting their vote. And they're going to have to sit with the fact that they, because of their judgmental, patronizing position, thought that the only people that were going to suffer under this administration deserved it. Because let's just be real. People in the church look at sinners, quote unquote sinners, as deserving of everything that comes their way, right? But they don't realize that they're also going to be deserving of what's coming their way because you were up on your pedestal, not thinking of your fellow man. You were allowing your unconscious bias, the same unconscious bias that led you to only attend a predominantly white church with like maybe a handful of ethnic people. That unconscious bias that makes you like hold on to your purse if a black person comes into your church. That same unconscious bias is what allowed you to vote for somebody who said all of the things he said he was going to do. And it didn't bother you because you thought Well, because I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm protected from all of this. So I think we really need to, as we move forward, just examine your religious beliefs. Examine what your churches look like. Because too many of y'all were fine having people you didn't know suffer under this administration, as that man warned. And now you're realizing that, ooh, you're not exempt. That the very God you pray to is teaching you a lesson about your compassion and how little of it you have. If you were thinking with compassion, you wouldn't just be stuck on gay marriage and abortion when you vote. You wouldn't be so quick to judge the scary immigrant or the scary Black person. You would be seeing people as God sees them. You would be seeing people through the eyes of love. You would not be looking down on them from your perch of religion. And if the church has many parts, why would we think that we weren't supposed to get politically involved? Like for the evangelical church, why would you think that you weren't supposed to get involved in issues of race and violence against Black people and racism, but you are supposed to get involved with abortion? Why would you fight so hard for Black babies to be born if you don't care about them once they get to be like 8? Or hell, even 6, when you consider them to be dangerous to your little white kids of the same age? I need a lot of you to sit with that. I need you to sit with that. Yes, a lot of this has been foretold, but y'all never thought that you would be the ones that were fooled. And you were. You were. You were. And I'm not saying it's too late. I'm saying that what your work is now is to figure out why you were so easily led by that man and to face some hard truths about what you really, really, and truly believe. This conversation is going to be ongoing, and I am going to be launching some products that help with these conversations. But until then, keep breathing, keep calling your representatives, and do something every day that is active, that can help us get out of this shit show. It doesn't have to be something public, but calling your reps, even if you just call one, will make a hell of a lot of difference. Everyone can do something. You do not have to post about it, but if that is the only thing that you have the energy to do today, you can do it. Because remember, it's largely church folks that have been discouraging me from speaking out. And now there's there's over 7,000 of you on my YouTube channel. There are people that said, oh, boycotts won't work, but they're working. So remember, the church system, American Christianity, taught enslaved Black people to be afraid of their anger. They taught enslaved Black people that anger was wrong. Why do you think they taught them that? Why do you think they taught them that? Why are white men allowed to get angry in the church, and that's seen as righteous anger? But a Black person getting angry? Demonic Jezebel spirit. Look at the power structures. Religion is used to control. And we're seeing it right now. We're seeing it right now. They are making all of these policy changes under the guise of bringing this nation back under Christianity. But which Christianity are they talking about? The fact that I even have to ask that is part of why I have deconstructed and left the church. So, yes, as we fight the good fight, we have to remember that there are people who are crashing out right now because they're realizing that they were manipulated by someone they thought God had called to lead them. And they're now having to face the fact that they were okay with harm coming to people that were other. But if you only follow the Old Testament, then yeah, that tracks. If you only follow the Old Testament, which is full of a lot of violence and a lot of taking over of land because God told this group of people that they were supposed to have this plot of land, and you read about how God delivered these large pieces of land to the ones who deserved it, then yeah, you're part of MAGA. I'm sure of it. But for those of you who are New Testament Christians, I'm gonna need y'all to reread that book and ask yourself some tough questions. If you're against healthcare for all, ask yourself how that would have fit in the New Testament church. Hang in there, y'all.